He built that place from nothing. And they told him to leave. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3:47, and the shop smelled of oil and waiting. The receptionist laughed. "There's nothing under your name, sir." He didn't argue. He just looked at his watch and waited. He built that place from nothing. And they told him to leave. The fluorescent lights hummed at 3:47 on a Tuesday afternoon, a sound Ethan Caldwell had known for 23 years. The shop smelled of oil and waiting, the particular weight of air that has absorbed 1,000 engine fires and 1,000 more conversations about parts that never arrived on time. He stood at the front counter, his dented green toolbox with its brass latch settled at his feet, and he did not straighten his posture. He had learned, over the past 2 years, to let his shoulders carry the shape of a man who looked down at engines for a living. It was not a disguise. It was a return. The receptionist was young. Her blue polo was crisp. Her name tag read Jenna in white block letters, and she did not look up from her screen when he cleared his throat. She was typing something, an order, a message, a list of things more important than the man in the faded red flannel shirt standing in front of her. "I need to check on a vehicle," Ethan said. His voice was low, even. "Old Ford F-150, been in the back for repairs." Jenna's eyes flicked to him, then back to the screen. Her fingers paused. "Name? Caldwell, Ethan Caldwell." She typed. The silence stretched. The air tools in the service bay cycled on and off, a pneumatic heartbeat. Jenna's brow furrowed, the smallest crease of inconvenience. She clicked something. Then she smiled. A practiced customer service smile that did not reach her eyes. "There's nothing under your name, sir." Ethan did not move. He stood with his hands in the pockets of his worn dark jeans, the scuffed brown work boots planted on the grease-stained concrete. He did not argue. He simply waited, the way a man waits when he knows the truth is not a matter of opinion, but of time. "Maybe it's under the plate number," he said. Jenna's smile tightened. "I checked all fields. No appointment, no vehicle." She tilted her head, the gesture of someone who has already decided the conversation is over. "You might have the wrong shop." Behind her, the door to the service bay swung open. A younger mechanic stepped out, wiping his hands on a dark rag. He was stocky, built low to the ground, with a thin mustache and a silver watch on his right wrist. His name was stitched across his chest, Marcus. He looked at Ethan, at the toolbox, at the worn flannel, and a smirk pulled at the corner of his mouth. "Problem, Jenna?" "Gentleman says he has a vehicle here. Nothing in the system." Marcus walked to the counter, arms crossed, feet planted wide. He looked Ethan up and down. The gray at the temples, the pale gray eyes, the silver wedding ring on the left hand. He did not see a man. He saw a problem. "Truck's not ready," Marcus said. "You'll have to come back tomorrow, with an appointment." Ethan looked at his watch. A worn stainless steel piece, the crystal scratched, the band faded from years of sweat and grease. 3:49. He let his hand drop back to his side. "I built this shop," Ethan said quietly. "I know where the truck is parked." Marcus laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound, the kind of laugh that says, "I have heard this before, and I am not impressed." He looked at Jenna, who smiled back, the two of them sharing a moment of shared certainty that this man was nothing. "Sure you did," Marcus said. "And I'm the CEO of Ford." Ethan did not flinch. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he extracted a single piece of paper, folded 4 times, the creases soft from years of being carried. He placed it on the counter and smoothed it flat. It was a deed of ownership. Caldwell Automotive, dated 2008. His name at the top, followed by the words 100% shareholder in bold beneath. Jenna's eyes dropped to the paper. Her smile did not survive the second. She read the name again, then the date, then the bold letters. Her hand went to her mouth, a small unconscious gesture of something that looked like fear. Marcus leaned in, his smirk still in place, ready to dismiss the paper the way he had dismissed the man. Then he read it. His face changed. The smirk did not fall so much as dissolve, replaced by a flat, unreadable stillness. He looked at Ethan, then at the paper, then back at Ethan. "You're—" Marcus started. "I'm the owner," Ethan said. He folded the deed with the same slow precision he used to fold a lifetime of receipts and letters and birth certificates, and slid it back into his wallet. "I need the truck ready by 5. I'm picking up my daughter." He picked up his toolbox, the brass latch catching the fluorescent light, and walked toward the service bay door. The receptionist's laugh was still hanging in the air behind him, but it had changed. It was no longer a dismissal. It was the sound of something breaking. He picked up his toolbox and walked toward the service bay door, the receptionist's laugh still hanging in the air behind him. The door swung shut, and the noise of the shop swallowed him whole. Air tools whined. A radio played country from a dented speaker bolted to the ceiling. The concrete floor was dark with years of oil and brake fluid, a map of every job that had ever been done in this room. Ethan Caldwell walked past the lifts, past the tire machine, past the alignment rack, where a young mechanic was wrestling with a control arm. He did not look at anyone. He did not need to. He knew this bay the way a man knows the rooms of his own house. His old truck sat in the back corner, under a layer of dust and shop grime. A 1995 Ford F-150, primer gray on the driver's side door, a crack in the windshield that had been there for 6 years. He had bought it the week he opened the first bay, had driven it through every snowstorm, every late-night parts run, every morning when he had to be at the shop before the sun came up. He set his dented green toolbox down on the concrete and opened the hood. The engine looked back at him like an old friend. Behind him, Marcus's boots echoed on the concrete. Hey, you can't be back here." Ethan did not turn around. He reached into the engine bay and touched the brake line, feeling for the seized caliper he already knew was there. "Sir, I'm talking to you. Customers aren't allowed in the service area." Ethan straightened slowly, his hands still resting on the edge of the engine bay. He turned his head just enough to meet Marcus's eyes. "I'm not a customer." Marcus's jaw tightened. His arms crossed over his chest. "You're not an employee either. I checked. You're not in the system." Ethan looked at him for a long moment. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The radio crackled through a commercial break. "Get Lou," Ethan said. "Tell him Ethan's in the back with the Ford." Marcus stared at him. Something flickered in his eyes. Not recognition, but uncertainty. He did not know the name, but the way Ethan had said it, quiet and certain, made him hesitate. He went. Ethan turned back to the engine. His hands found the caliper bolts, and he began to work. The bay was quiet now. The other mechanics had stopped. They stood at their stations, air tools hanging limp in their hands, watching the man in the faded red flannel shirt work on a truck that looked like it belonged in a junkyard. They did not know what they were watching. They only knew that something was wrong. Lou came through the side door 5 minutes later. He was a heavy man in his 60s, with gray hair, and a face that had been shaped by 40 years of grease and hard decisions. He wore a blue mechanic's uniform with the shop logo on the chest. The logo was a stylized engine block with the words Caldwell Automotive beneath it. He stopped when he saw the man at the truck. For a moment, he did not move. Then his face went pale, the color draining from his cheeks like water from a sink. Ethan did not look up. He was working the caliper loose, his knuckles white with effort. "Lou, you're back." "I'm back." Lou took a step forward, then stopped. His hands were trembling. He put them in his pockets. We heard you were—" "I know what you heard." Ethan set the caliper down on the concrete and reached for his PB blaster. He sprayed the rusted bracket, the chemical smell sharp in the still air. "I needed some time." Lou nodded slowly. He looked at the truck, at the engine, at the man who had built this shop with his own hands, and then walked away from it 2 years ago. He remembered the day Ethan had left, the phone call, the voice on the other end, flat and precise, saying his wife had died at 6:43 that morning, saying he would not be coming back. Marcus didn't know. Lou said quietly, "None of them know. They were all hired after—" "I know." Ethan straightened and wiped his hands on a rag. He looked at Lou, and for the first time, his face softened. "It's fine. They didn't know. How could they?" Lou shook his head. "I should have told them. You should have kept the shop running." Ethan picked up the ratchet. "That's what I asked you to do." They stood in silence for a moment. The other mechanics had gone back to work, but they were watching from the corners of their eyes. Marcus stood by the alignment rack, his arms still crossed, his face unreadable. Lou looked at the truck. "That caliper's been seized for 3 months. I kept meaning to get to it." "I know." Ethan crouched down, his hands moving back into the engine. "I'll take care of it." Lou watched him for a long moment. Then he walked over to his tool chest, pulled out a 3/8 ratchet, and handed it to Ethan without a word. Ethan took it. Their eyes met. "I'll need a can of PB Blaster," Ethan said. Lou smiled. A thin, tired smile. "You've already got one." Ethan glanced down at the can in his hand. He almost laughed. Almost. "Right." He set the toolbox down in the bay and rolled up his sleeves. The faded red flannel bunched at his elbows, revealing the pale skin of his forearms, the old scars from years of work. "I'll need a 3/8 ratchet and a can of PB Blaster." Lou handed him the ratchet. "You've got both." Ethan nodded. He turned back to the truck, and the world narrowed to the engine in front of him. For the next hour, he worked in silence. The other mechanics gave him space. They watched from a distance, the way men watch a stranger who does not belong, but they said nothing. Marcus stayed by the alignment rack, his arms uncrossed now, his hands in his pockets. He watched Ethan work the way a man watches something he does not understand. At 4:52, Ethan finished. He tightened the last bolt, lowered the hood, and wiped his hands on a rag. The truck looked the same as it had before. Primer gray, cracked windshield, dust on the fenders, but it was whole again. Ready. He stood there for a moment, his hand resting on the hood. The metal was warm. The engine ticked as it cooled. He picked up his toolbox and walked back through the bay, past the mechanics who would not meet his eyes, past the alignment rack where Marcus stood frozen, past the framed photo on the wall of a younger man in a mechanic's cap, standing next to a single bay, and a sign that read, "Caldwell Automotive. Open." He pushed through the door into the front office. The receptionist looked up from her phone. Her smile flickered when she saw him. "Sir, I told you, you need an appointment." Ethan set his toolbox down on the counter. "Pull up the ownership records." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "The ownership records for this shop." His voice was quiet, patient. "Type Caldwell Automotive into the search bar and hit enter." She hesitated. Her hand hovered over the keyboard. She looked at him, then at the computer screen, then back at him. She typed. The screen flickered. A document appeared. A deed of ownership, filed with the county in 2008. A name at the top, bold and unmistakable. Ethan Caldwell, 100% shareholder. The receptionist's face drained of color. Her hand went to her mouth. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, her lips parted. "Sir," she whispered, I didn't." Ethan picked up his toolbox. "It's fine." The phone on the counter rang. She picked it up automatically, her voice shaking. "Caldwell Automotive, how can I help you?" A pause. Her eyes went to Ethan, then back to the screen. "Yes, ma'am, he's here. He's the owner." She set the phone down slowly. Her hands were trembling. "That was the regional manager," she said. "She's on her way." Ethan nodded. He looked at the framed photo on the wall. The younger man, the single bay, the sign that read, "Open," and then he looked at the receptionist. "I'll be in the bay." He turned and walked back through the door, the receptionist's voice following him, small and hollow. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know." The receptionist's phone rang. It was the regional manager. "Yes, ma'am, he's here. He's the owner." The words hit the shop floor like a dropped wrench. The young woman in the blue polo stared at the receiver as if it had bitten her. The line was already dead. She set it back in the cradle with the careful precision of someone trying not to break something fragile. Ethan Caldwell stood at the counter, his pale gray eyes fixed on a point somewhere past her shoulder. He had not moved when the phone rang. He had not moved when her face shifted from confusion to recognition to the slow, terrible bloom of shame. He simply waited. His hands were in the pockets of his worn jeans, the dented green toolbox at his feet, the brass latch catching the fluorescent light like a held breath. Marcus had stepped out of the service bay at the sound of the phone, his dark blue uniform still carrying the smell of grease and brake cleaner. He stood with his arms crossed, his stocky frame planted wide, his dark brown eyes fixed on the scene unfolding at the counter. The thin mustache above his lip twitched once. He said nothing. The receptionist opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, and the name sounded foreign on her tongue, as if she were testing a word she had never spoken aloud. I mean the system." "You don't have to explain," Ethan said. His voice was low and even, the voice of a man who had learned that explanations were a currency he no longer needed to spend. "The system only has what you put in it." She looked at the computer screen, at the name that had been there all along, nested in a field she had never thought to check. The ownership records were not in the customer database. They were in the corporate registry, a separate tab, a different login. She had never been trained to look there. No one had ever asked. The shop had grown quiet. The air tools had stopped. The two mechanics in gray coveralls had emerged from the bay, their hands black with grease, their eyes moving between Ethan and Marcus, and the receptionist like spectators at a slow-motion accident. A customer in a plaid jacket had set down his coffee cup and was watching from the waiting area, his mouth slightly open. Ethan reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He opened it to a specific compartment, the one behind the driver's license, and withdrew a folded piece of paper. It was yellowed at the edges, creased along 4 precise lines. He set it on the counter. "Original deed of ownership," he said. "Filed 2008. You'll see my signature at the bottom." The receptionist did not touch it. She did not need to. She had seen the screen. She had heard the regional manager's voice. She knew, but she looked at the paper anyway, at the faded ink, at the date in the top corner, at the name that matched the one on her screen. 7 years. The shop had been his for 7 years, before she was hired. He had built it from a single bay to 6. He had hired the original crew, the ones whose framed photograph still hung on the wall above the workbench. He had signed the lease, ordered the first tool chest, written the first payroll check with a pen that ran out of ink halfway through. And now he stood in the same building, in a faded red flannel shirt and scuffed brown work boots, and no one recognized him. Marcus took a step forward, his arms uncrossed. He looked at Ethan, really looked, the way you look at a photograph you have walked past 100 times without seeing, the square jaw, the heavy brows, the silver wedding ring on the left hand. The way he stood, slightly stooped, as if the weight of the place was still on his shoulders. "You're him," Marcus said. Not a question, a statement, delivered flat, the disbelief already fading into something else. "You're the one who built this." Ethan looked at him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The shop's neon sign flickered once in the window, a brief pulse of red light that painted the concrete floor like a heartbeat. "I'm the one who signed the papers," Ethan said. "The building did the rest." Marcus shook his head. "No, that's not how it works. Buildings don't build themselves." Ethan's pale gray eyes held Marcus's dark brown ones. There was no anger in them, no judgment, just the steady, patient gaze of a man who had learned to see people the way he saw engines, for what they were, not what they appeared to be. "You're right," Ethan said. "They don't." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens when something important is being decided, a held breath before the plunge. The receptionist had pressed her hands, flat against the counter, her knuckles white. The customer in the plaid jacket had picked up his coffee again, but was not drinking it. The two mechanics had not moved. Ethan picked up the deed of ownership, folded it along the same 4 precise creases, and slid it back into his wallet. He tucked the wallet into his back pocket, then reached down and lifted the dented green toolbox by its brass handle. "I don't need an apology," he said, and his voice carried the same quiet weight it had carried all evening. "I need the truck ready by 5. I'm picking up my daughter." He turned and walked toward the service bay, his boots scuffing against the grease-stained concrete. The mechanics parted to let him pass, their eyes following him like a question they were afraid to ask aloud. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, then moved to follow. "Lou," Marcus said, his voice low. "The foreman, he knew, didn't he?" Ethan did not stop walking. "Lou has been here since the beginning. He knows everything." They reached the truck, an old F-150, dented and dusty, parked in the back corner of the bay where the light was worst. The hood was still up, the seized brake caliper still sitting on the workbench where Ethan had left it. He set the toolbox down, opened it with a click of the brass latch, and pulled out a 3/8 ratchet and a can of PB Blaster. "You want help?" Marcus asked. Ethan looked at him. The younger man's arms were crossed again, but there was something different in his posture now. The defiance was gone. What remained was something closer to respect, hard-earned and unfamiliar, like a tool you had never used before. "Hand me that torque wrench," Ethan said, "the one with the red handle." Marcus picked it up from the workbench and passed it to him. Their hands did not touch. The transfer was clean, professional, the way it is between two people who understand the weight of a tool. Ethan leaned over the engine, his hands moving with the same practiced precision they had always had. The ratchet clicked, the caliper slid into place. The truck, piece by piece, was becoming whole again. Behind him, the shop began to stir back to life. The air tools started up. The customer in the plaid jacket sat down. The receptionist picked up the phone and called the regional manager back, her voice low and careful. But in the back bay, under the flickering neon, there was only the sound of a man working, and the quiet, steady rhythm of a world being put back together. Diane arrived in a silver sedan that looked like it had never seen a grease stain. She parked at the curb, stepped out in heels that clicked against the asphalt, and walked past Ethan without recognizing him. She was looking for someone in a suit, someone who looked like he owned something. The receptionist pointed toward the service bay. Diane's eyes followed the gesture and landed on a man in a faded red flannel shirt, wiping his hands on a rag. She stopped walking, her mouth opened. Then she remembered herself and crossed the remaining distance with her hand extended. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm so sorry. I should have been notified." Ethan shook her hand once, briefly, and let go. He didn't say anything. Diane turned to the receptionist, who was now standing behind the counter with her arms pressed against her sides like a child caught in a lie. "You didn't check the ownership records?" "There's nothing under his name," the receptionist said, her voice smaller than it had been 20 minutes ago. "I checked. The system shows the shop's legal name," Diane said. "Caldwell Automotive. Caldwell. You didn't think to ask." The receptionist looked at Ethan. He met her gaze without anger, without triumph, without anything she could use to absolve herself of the silence she had filled with a laugh. He simply waited. He was good at waiting. Diane turned back to Ethan. "I can have her reassigned. I can have the entire front desk staff retrained. Whatever you need." "I don't need any of that," Ethan said. "I need my truck ready by 5. Diane blinked. "That's it? That's it." She looked at him as if waiting for the other shoe to drop. For the firing, the lawsuit, the public dressing down, that would restore the natural order of things. But Ethan Caldwell had never been interested in the natural order of things. He had built a business by hiring people who didn't fit it. Marcus stood in the corner of the bay, arms crossed, his back against a tool chest. He had watched the entire exchange without moving. His face was a study in contradiction, part shame, part defiance, part something else that Ethan recognized from his own younger self. The unwillingness to admit that you had been wrong about someone, because admitting it meant admitting that your judgment was not as sharp as you thought. Ethan walked over to him. The other mechanics pretended to work, but their hands slowed. The air in the bay changed. "You're a good mechanic," Ethan said. "I saw you working on that sedan. You know what you're doing." Marcus said nothing. I started the same way, Ethan continued. Young, fast, certain I could read a man in 3 seconds. And I was wrong more times than I was right. Marcus's jaw tightened. You could have said something. The minute she laughed at you, you could have told her who you were. I could have. Why didn't you? Ethan looked at him for a long moment. His pale gray eyes were steady, unblinking. Because I wanted to see what kind of shop I'd built. And now I know. Marcus dropped his arms. He looked at the floor, then back at Ethan. What do you mean? A shop where a receptionist laughs at a man in a flannel shirt, Ethan said. A shop where a mechanic backs her up without asking a single question. A shop where nobody thought to wonder why a man with a toolbox might know his way around an engine better than anyone in the room. The silence stretched. A pneumatic wrench hissed in the next bay. A radio played something country and forgettable. Lou knew, Marcus said quietly. Lou has been here since 2008. He watched me weld the first lift into the concrete. He knows what I look like when I haven't slept for 2 days. He knows what I look like when I've been crying. Ethan paused. The rest of you only know what I look like when I walk through the door, and that's not enough. Marcus nodded slowly. He didn't apologize. Ethan hadn't asked him to. I'll get the truck finished, Marcus said. No, I'll finish it. You watch. Ethan walked back to the old truck, a 1997 Ford F-150 with rust along the wheel wells and a dent in the passenger door. He had bought it new the year he opened the first bay. He had driven it to every job site, every parts run, every late-night tow. The seats were worn to the shape of his body. The gear shift was polished smooth from 20 years of his palm. He opened the hood and leaned into the engine. The caliper was seized. The rotor warped from heat, the brake line beginning to crack. Standard wear for a truck that had been sitting for 2 years. He worked in silence, his hands moving with the economy of someone who had done this 1,000 times. The other mechanics watched from the edges of the bay, none of them offering help, none of them leaving. Lou came over with a cup of coffee. Black, no sugar. The way Ethan had always drunk it. You didn't have to do this yourself, Lou said. Yes, I did. You could have let them fix it. Let them earn back some respect. Ethan straightened and wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. Respect isn't earned by fixing a brake caliper. It's earned by showing up every day and doing the work that no one else wants to do. I stopped showing up. They filled the gap. That's not their fault. That's mine. Lou studied him. You've changed. I had to. How's Lily? Ethan's hands paused on the wrench. He looked at the dent in the passenger door. She's okay. She doesn't sleep through the night yet. She still asks for her mother. What do you tell her? I tell her the truth, that her mother loved her more than anything in the world, that she's still here, in the things we remember. Lou nodded. He had been there. His wife had died 6 years ago, cancer, and he had come to work the next day because staying home would have killed him. He understood the arithmetic of grief better than anyone. Ethan finished the brake job in 40 minutes. He bled the lines, torqued the caliper bolts to spec, and lowered the truck off the jack. He started the engine, let it idle, and listened for the things that only a man who had built a truck from the ground up could hear. The engine was steady, the brakes were solid, the truck was ready. He drove it out of the bay and parked it in front of the shop. The afternoon light was slanting through the windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, his hands on the wheel, looking at the shop through the windshield. The framed photo of the original crew was still on the wall. The calendar from 2014 was still pinned above the workbench. The dented red tool chest with the missing drawer handle was still in the corner. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. He stepped out of the truck and walked to the front counter. The receptionist was sitting at her computer, her hands in her lap, her face pale. She looked at him and opened her mouth to speak, but he shook his head. You don't have to say anything, he said. Just do better tomorrow. She nodded. Her eyes were wet. Ethan turned to the crew. They had gathered in the bay, all 6 of them, standing in a loose semicircle around the truck. Lou was at the front, his arms crossed, his coffee cup still in his hand. Marcus was at the back, his arms uncrossed now, his face unreadable. "I'm handing day-to-day operations to Lou," Ethan said, effective immediately. He knows the shop. He knows the work. He knows what matters. Lou blinked. "Ethan, you've been running this place for 2 years anyway. Now it's official." Lou didn't argue. He had never argued with Ethan. That was why Ethan trusted him. Ethan looked at Marcus. "You've got potential. Don't waste it on assumptions. The next time a man walks through that door in a flannel shirt, ask him what he knows before you tell him what he isn't." Marcus held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. Ethan walked out of the shop and got into the truck. He turned the key and the engine caught on the first try. He pulled away from the curb, the shop lights fading in the rearview mirror, and drove toward the elementary school where Lily was waiting. The clock on the wall above the break room door read 3:42. Ethan Caldwell had been under the truck for the better part of an hour, and now he stood wiping the grease from his hands on a rag that had seen better days. The old truck sat on the lift, its brake caliper replaced, its lines bled, its engine idling with a low, steady hum that sounded like home. He walked to the front counter, the scuffed brown work boots making a soft, scuffing sound on the concrete floor. The receptionist, a young woman in a blue polo named Sarah, was on the phone, her voice light and laughing. She saw him approach and held up a finger, 1 minute, without breaking her conversation. Ethan waited. He set the dented green toolbox down beside the counter, the brass latch clicking softly against the metal. His pale gray eyes moved across the room, taking in the framed photos on the wall. The original crew standing in front of a single bay with a hand-painted sign. Himself, younger, grinning, his arm around a man who had since retired. The shop had grown since then. 6 bays, a waiting room with leather chairs. A sign out front that said Caldwell Automotive in clean block letters. Sarah hung up the phone, her smile still in place. "Can I help you, sir?" "I need to check the ownership records on the system," Ethan said, his voice quiet, measured. Her smile flickered. "I'm sorry. That's not something I can pull up for customers." "I'm not a customer." She tilted her head, the practice dismissal already forming. "Sir, I already checked. There's nothing under your name. If you need to schedule a repair, I can put you in for next Tuesday." Ethan reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He flipped it open and slid a card across the counter. It was plain white, with a single line of embossed text. Ethan Caldwell, owner. Sarah looked at the card, then at him, then back at the card. "I'm going to need you to pull up the deed," Ethan said. "It's in the system under Caldwell Holdings." Her hands trembled as she turned to the computer. The keys clicked slowly, hesitantly. The screen loaded, and her face changed. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving them pale and blotchy. The cursor blinked next to a line of text she had never seen before. 100% shareholder, Ethan Caldwell. She looked up, her mouth open, the words catching in her throat. I'm so sorry, Mr. Caldwell. I didn't know." You didn't need to know," Ethan said. "You just needed to look." The service bay door swung open, and Marcus Webb stepped out, his dark blue uniform, still clean. His thick black hair buzzed at the sides. He had a smirk on his face, but it faltered when he saw Sarah's expression. "What's going on?" Marcus asked, crossing his arms. Ethan turned to face him. "The truck is ready. I need it off the lift and parked out front by 4:30. Marcus blinked. "You can't just—" "I can," Ethan said, his voice still quiet, still calm. "I own this shop." Marcus laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, full of disbelief. "Right. And I'm the CEO of Ford." Ethan didn't respond. He just looked at Marcus, his pale gray eyes steady, his square jaw set. The silence stretched, and the laughter died in Marcus's throat. Lou, the shop foreman, stepped out of the bay, wiping his hands on a rag. He was a grizzled man in his late 50s, with gray hair and a face lined by years of grease and hard work. He saw the scene and walked over, his eyes meeting Ethan's. "Ethan," Lou said, his voice low, "you want me to handle this?" "No," Ethan said. I want Marcus to look at the screen. Marcus turned to the computer. Sarah stepped aside, her hands still trembling. The screen glowed with the ownership records. Caldwell Automotive, established 2008. Sole proprietor Ethan Caldwell. Marcus's face went through a series of changes, confusion, disbelief, then a slow, creeping shame that settled in his jaw. He uncrossed his arms. His hands dropped to his sides. I didn't know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. No one knew, Ethan said. That's the point. He picked up his toolbox, the brass latch catching the fluorescent light. He walked toward the service bay, his steps slow and deliberate. Lou followed, and after a long moment, Marcus followed too. The truck sat on the lift, its silver paint dull but clean, its engine idling with a steady rhythm. Ethan set the toolbox down and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms marked with old scars and fading tattoos. I need a 3/8 ratchet and a can of PB blaster, he said. Lou handed him the tools without a word. Marcus stood in the corner of the bay, watching, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Ethan worked in silence. He checked the caliper, the lines, the fluid levels. He tightened a bolt that had been left loose, adjusted a belt that was a quarter turn off. His hands moved with a precision that came from decades of practice, from a time when he had been the one under the hood, not the one in the office. The other mechanics drifted in, one by one, standing at the edges of the bay, watching. No one spoke. The only sounds were the clink of metal and the low hum of the engine. At 4:28, Ethan lowered the truck from the lift. He wiped his hands on the rag, tossed it into a bin, and walked to the driver's seat. He started the engine, listened to it for a full 30 seconds, then nodded. It's good, he said. He drove the truck out of the bay and parked it in front of the shop, the engine idling as he stepped out. The afternoon light was golden, slanting through the windows, catching the dust motes in the air. A small car pulled up to the curb. An older woman stepped out, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and opened the passenger door. A little girl climbed out, her dark hair braided, her pale gray eyes, the same pale gray as Ethan's, scanning the shop. Lily, Ethan said, and his voice softened for the first time. The girl ran to him, her small hand clutching a stuffed rabbit with one floppy ear. She wrapped her arms around his waist, and he lifted her into the truck's cab, settling her into the passenger seat. He stood there for a moment, his hand on the doorframe, looking at her. Then he turned and walked back to the shop. The crew was gathered in the bay, standing in a loose semicircle. Lou was at the front, his arms crossed. Marcus stood to the side, his eyes on the floor. I'm handing day-to-day operations to Lou, Ethan said, effective immediately. No one moved. Lou knows this shop better than I do. He's been here since the day I opened the first bay. He knows the customers, the vendors, the work. He'll run it the way it should be run. He looked at Marcus, who finally lifted his eyes. You've got potential, Ethan said. Don't waste it on assumptions. Marcus nodded, his throat tight. Ethan walked back to the truck, climbed into the driver's seat, and closed the door. Lily looked up at him, her small hand reaching for his on the gear shift. Did you fix it, Daddy? She asked. I fixed it, he said. He put the truck in gear and pulled away from the curb. The shop lights faded in the rearview mirror, the neon open sign flickering once before disappearing around a corner. Lily's hand stayed in his, her pulse steady against his palm. He drove home.